Penn State lost to Oregon by a score of 37-45, and there were some questionable decisions that head coach James Franklin made, and Penn State was just, oh so close, but also far away from Oregon at the same time, constantly trailing. I believe Oregon is the best team in the country, and yet at the same time, Penn State was in the boxing ring with Oregon, and they had chances to overthrow the Ducks and look like the nation's best team as well. So I want to talk about why Penn State can win the national championship. I do think they're one of America's best teams. And in addition, we won't talk about this too much, but their path in the college football playoff is pretty easy. You host SMU. If you beat SMU at home, you meet up with Boise State in a night game in a neutral site. And then whether it's Georgia, Indiana, or Notre Dame, who you could hypothetically face in the semifinal, those teams have severe limitations. Roster-wise, they are inferior to you. Coaching staff-wise, that's a totally different story with some of the questionable decisions that we know Franklin to make in big games that we've seen him make this year against Ohio State and also against Oregon. But Penn State right now has a great roster, and they can win the national championship. This team's identity is physicality. They want to be physical. They are physical. They also want to be tactical, and in many ways they are tactical. Andy Kotelnicki is the best offensive coordinator in the country, and Tom Allen, I think, is a good defensive coordinator. I just think that he got caught up against the nation's number one offense, or at least one of the best offenses in the country, that honestly has a matchup advantage against his secondary. Of course, could have done a better job, should have done a better job, but I think that the coordinators and assistant coaches for Penn State really helped them in their quest to win it all. They are experienced, especially along the lines of scrimmage where they have a plethora of seniors, both starting and also in the two deep. They make elite adjustments, often winning the second half or pushing in the second half against their opponents, even in the big games. Against Ohio State, they figured out Ohio State's offense, held it to only field goals in the second half. If they just scored in the end zone on that final drive that they had, they probably would have outscored Ohio State in the second half. And against Oregon, they came out with juice and momentum after halftime, and I think in many ways they won the second half against Oregon. It's just Oregon sort of game-controlled Penn State and even owned them at times in the first, and they held on like the good teams do. And Penn State also has NFL-caliber depth. They have an NFL roster. It's one of the best rosters in all of college football. I think, as we'll talk about in this video, it's actually the best roster in all of college football when it comes to your potential to game control your opponents and dictate the pace of the game. There are, of course, things that are problematic, though, for Penn State. I think that the Nittany Lions right now have some limitations at quarterback. I think that their wide receiver room isn't deep. The special teams have been disastrous all season long. And you could add to the list of Penn State's weaknesses, you could add coaching. Not from their coordinators, especially not from their assistant coaches, who I think make up one of the best assistant coaching pools in the country, but from their head coach, from the CEO, who ultimately makes the biggest decisions and who is often called upon in the biggest of games because he holds them back. I sent out on Twitter an opinion of mine, and maybe because if Penn State wins the playoff, this opinion might be made invalid at least for this year. In fact, it would be invalid this year because the tweet was about this season. The opinion was that if Dan Lanning had Penn State's roster and he coached against Dan Lanning with Oregon's roster, Penn State wins yesterday. In fact, they win it all. That if Jim Harbaugh teleported to Happy Valley and coached Penn State this year with the staff, with the roster, only thing that's different is James Franklin out, Jim Harbaugh in. They win the national title. Same thing if it's Kirby Smart, for example, or Nick Saban, or I even said Jonathan Smith from Michigan State. I mean, he likes to run power football, power spread. Penn State's built to do that. I think that Ryan Day would have a much easier time with some of his own team's identity crisis about being physical with this Penn State roster than with his current Ohio State roster. And I think he would do great things with this team. and win big games. They have weaknesses, the Nittany Lions do, and teams are going to take advantage of that. They're going to take advantage of the coaching mistakes. They are going to take advantage the best they can of Penn State's limitations at wide receiver. They are going to take advantage of the special teams errors, try to pin Penn State deep, and be able to try and block Penn State's punts or return punts against Penn State. Riley Thompson's been a bit shaky this year. And also try and confuse Drew Allar, who does get confused, and put him under the bright lights, get pressure on him, because his footwork under pressure is not secure, like we saw against the Oregon Ducks. The Nittany Lions are not without weaknesses here. However, their strengths are immaculate. They're incredible. Running back room is one of the best in the nation. The tight end room is the best in the nation, full stop. Their offensive line might be the nation's best. It's the same thing with their defensive line. No one has the O-line, D-line combination that the Nittany Lions do this year. No one. Maybe Ohio State, when their starting offensive line was completely healthy, but even then I've been more impressed with Penn State's defensive line this year than Ohio State's. And what they did to Oregon, what they did to many teams this year. Maryland, where Maryland had 8 TFLs and yet Penn State ran for over 200 yards. They had one of their inferior games on the O-line and were without Anthony Donko for the first time for a full game, and they still bullied Maryland on the ground, which, again, it's just Maryland, but it's something to keep in mind. They ran the ball well against Wisconsin as the game went on. They killed Illinois on the ground. And, of course, that game against Oregon, where they had nearly 300 yards, that was super impressive. And you look on defense, D-line, linebacker, secondary, I think they're strong at many points on their roster. And the second half adjustments really help Penn State as well. They are the nation's best second half team. And I don't think anyone would debate that after the Big Ten championship game. The problem is they do start slow in almost every way, both in discipline, in execution, in play calling, and that puts them behind the 8 ball at times. There have been other times where they put themselves behind the 8 ball even as the game has gone on, like against Ohio State in the second quarter, or against Oregon where they were down by 18 points in the second quarter. This is an elite team, though, relative to this year. Of course, I think this is a down year in football. I don't think this Penn State team is better than, let's say, last year's Ohio State team or last year's Michigan team. It's probably, in a lot of ways, similar to last year's Georgia team, for example. And then again, because of coaching, I would not pick them against last year's Georgia or even last year's Oregon. And there are many other teams in 2022, 2021, Alabama for sure in 2020, several teams in 19. We could go on and on and on that I would pick to beat every team in this year, including Penn State. But all that matters is this year. Penn State doesn't have to play anyone from prior years, and no one from prior years has to play Penn State. That's not how this works. That's hypothetical. That's for fun. In the here and now, Penn State has one of the best rosters in the country. They are the nation's best team, and I think in terms of game control, in terms of playing Big Ten football, and in terms of the saying that defense wins championships, and trench play and running the ball, being physical wins championships, Penn State may have the nation's best roster in that regard. Their key strong points are running back with Singleton and Allen, tight end with Tyler Warren and Khalil Dinkins, the offensive line, Olivega Ione, you got Drew Shelton, you have Nolan Rucci, you have J.B. Nelson, you also have Nick Dawkins, who, my goodness, Nick Dawkins showed out yesterday, had an awesome game, very physical player, veteran, a leader of men. Penn State's offensive line and their D-line is incredible. They have a game-controlling offense that when their defense plays well, they can dictate the pace of the game. And a defense that, relative to this season, I'm going to say is still elite, even after yesterday. Think about it this way. Ohio State's defense is better than Penn State's. It's the best defense in the country, and I think it's clearly better than Penn State's. Oregon could have scored 39 points if they make that fourth down conversion. And at that point, it's a nickel and dime difference between what they did to Penn State's defense. I just think Oregon's offense, the way it's schemed, the fact they have several X-factor players, if their offense has any aliens at all, and the more I think about it, they're all on offense, and they're all really in the passing offense, makes it so hard to defend. So hard to defend. Oregon plays Big Ten football, but they also brought their Pac-12 element on offense, and that includes a speed and acceleration that I don't think many Big Ten defenses are used to. It's why the SEC teams at times, or some of the Southern schools, would blitz Big Ten teams at times when they matched up in the postseason, because Oregon has a speed to them that I don't think anyone else in the Big Ten does. Penn State showed some of that, by the way, on the defensive line with Abdul Carter. They showed it a lot on the offensive line and at running back as well. So this is a strong team. And when you look at the positions, the non-negotiables, where Penn State is going to cause issues from these position groups to other teams, I look at Tyler Warren at tight end, 1,202 all-purpose yards, 11 touchdowns. I look at the offensive line, who's helping the rushing offense to average 5.3 yards per carry, which is 15th nationally, and a defensive line that's holding their opponents to 3.3 yards per carry nationally. And they played Oregon. They've played Darius Taylor in Minnesota. They've played USC and Woody Marks, who are top 15 in yards per carry. They faced off against Bowling Green, who has a good rushing offense and a good offense overall. West Virginia, who has a great rushing offense at times. They played Ohio State, and Ohio State was injured on the O-line, but they put together a nice game plan with their rushing game, where Chip Kelly called a lot of speed options and took advantage of some things. And Penn State's defense, I still think, especially in the trenches, is elite here, guys. I mean, Abdul Carter, Dani Dennis-Sutton, Zane Durant, and then on the O-line, Nick Dawkins, J.B. Nelson, Olavega Ione, especially on the interior of that O-line, and then Tyler Warren at tight end. These are players that will cause issues for opposing offenses and defenses. These are position groups where, let's say, for Georgia has had some issues at times defending the pass and even defending the run. They're going to have to go through this O-line. They're not going to be able to scheme around the O-line or scheme around Tyler Warren. They're just going to have to stop him, and that's going to be hard. Georgia and Texas this year have had problems running the ball with their O-line. They're going to have to go through Penn State's D-line. They can't just go around it. Penn State's too complete of a team, and they're too good at those positions. They're just going to have to stop them, like Oregon did. Oregon shut down Penn State's pass rush, but Oregon is the best offensive tackle duo in college football. With the non-negotiables for any team, not all teams have them. Few do, but Penn State's one who has multiple. You just have to face them. You can't run away from them. You have to stand your ground. You have to face them. You have to be aggressive. You have to declare war. You cannot appease them. You can't be diplomatic about it. You have to go to war. And Penn State's non-negotiables are their trench play and also their tight end, Tyler Warren, who is a Swiss Army knife and exceptional at catching the football. He is an X-factor player on offense. Same with the running backs, Nicholas Singleton and Kaytron Allen, center Nick Dawkins, and guard Olavega Ione. Those are the X-factor players for Penn State's offense. Those are the players that move Andy Kotelnicki's unit, that execute his plays the best, that help Penn State score more touchdowns and be more explosive than they were last year. And Warren is not just an X-factor player through the air. He's an elite blocker. And he can make moves on the ground, too, when they put him at Wildcat quarterback. Kaytron Allen and Nicholas Singleton aren't just threats on the ground as running backs, but through the air as receivers, particularly Nicholas Singleton. And Nick Dawkins and his offensive line, he's the center, the leader of that group, they aren't just physical, and they don't just put their heads down and do well at downfield blocking and all those things in the rushing game. They are good at pass protection. Ohio State only got 2 sacks on them, even when they blitzed. It was 2 in a row where they changed up their coverage scheme, and it was more so a coverage sack than a pressure sack in both of those instances. Oregon only got 1 sack on Penn State. And it was a sack on Bo Pribula, the backup QB, on kind of a weird play, not Drew Allar. This offense is one of the nation's best. It's a top 5 offense by ESPN's efficiency, and it may even be higher than the 5th best offense or even 4th best offense nationally. It's peaking right now. The defense has some work to do, but I still think the defense is full of X-factor players too. I think that when you look at, Zane Durant, Abdul Carter, Dani Dennis-Sutton along the defensive line, you got linebacker Kobe King, corner A.J. Harris, you got Jaylen Reed at safety. Those are X-factor players, in my mind, for Penn State. I think that's very clear. I think that the defense for Penn State, they have some issues, but they're good. They're great. I would even say elite. And that's all I'm going to say for the defense. They have some things to work through. I think they'll get some of them right. Ultimately, if Penn State wants to win it all, it's going to come down more sort of James Franklin than players on defense or players on offense. They have an elite defense with players who will make you pay, who will earn TFLs, who will earn sacks, earn turnovers, potentially win the game for the offense. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also hit that notification bell so that way you can get notified when new content from College Football with Sam drops. I appreciate you very much, and also share the video around to others who enjoy the sport of college football and love it as I do and as you do, and comment your thoughts down below so that we can have a conversation, because I want to know what you are thinking. And join our Discord server where we talk college football 24/7 via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Thank you to my Heisman Patreon members, Crash2488, Brascal Rascal, and Carlo OH. Thank you to my All-American Patreon members, Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye. And thank you to my All-Conference members, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus. Make sure to check out my merchandise store and or Patreon page, or super chat down in the comment section below to support the channel. The Patreon page and merchandise store links are in the description or down below in the pinned comment. I hope you have a wonderful day. It is December, so Merry Christmas and also Happy New Year. I will see you guys soon.